Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buhl. Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to capture, hold, or rehabilitate any wild animal. If you find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. We will tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. There are three possible outcomes in wildlife rehabilitation: release, euthanasia, and placement. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence in their natural habitat is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We'll talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. Some such animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode, we'll speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation, ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. Hi there, glad you're back. If you're just joining us, this is part 2 of my discussion with Deb Galle. Now, Deb is a Connecticut-based wildlife rehabilitator who specializes in caring for North American cottontail rabbits. In part 1, we covered Deb's origin story and the common question, why rehabilitate rabbits? Now, later in part 1, we touch on interpreting finder stories, techniques to avoid causing additional stress, monitoring babies after intake, enclosures, maintaining a good relationship with your vet of record, and more. Jam-packed. This episode, we pick up on the conversation of caring for baby rabbits after intake, and Deb and I go into detail about formulas, feeding techniques, digestive health, wound healing, pre-release conditioning, and release. Again, jam-packed. So let's hop right into it. So we have got them started on formula. You put, I think when we were talking before we were recording, that you like to use the snuggle safes for.
Yeah, again, this is one of my principles. The third one, which is adhere or mirror nature as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And when you're feeding a rabbit, the rabbits have their feet on the ground. Remember, they're a prey species. So they have their feet on the ground when they're with their mom. They feel secure. Mm-hmm. So holding them and trying to syringe feed them, they're in your grasp. They're caught. They're not stress-free. Mm-hmm. Tube feeding them, same thing, because you're holding them. Mm-hmm. They're not feeling, we think, oh, they're okay. They're not squiggling around. I have a good grip and I can get the nipple in and they're suckling. But they're not suckling stress-free. Mm-hmm. When you put them on the heating thing, as stress-free as we can get.
Right.
When you're putting them on the heating pad, and I have fleece over them, especially if their eyes are open, so they don't have to look at me. They don't see me. Mm-hmm. They just see the syringe. And they will drink it immediately. I mean, not the 25% formula, but once we get to like the 50%, 75%, when we're at full formula, they're guzzling. They're like, yeah, we're in. Okay.
We're all in.
But their feet are on the ground. And anytime you see a mom feeding them, I mean, sometimes they flip over, and go on their backs, which we never feed them, by the way, never feed a rabbit on its back or pretty much any animal.
Any mammal. Yeah, no, don't feed on your back.
But when their 4 feet are on the ground, and sometimes they will turn over in the fleece. So they're comfortable because they flip over like they're going to nurse from mom. Wow. It's very funny to watch. So they're warm, they're covered, they feel safe. They have their feet around them. They're not being gripped by anyone. And I really feel that has an effect on de-stressing them during the feeding process and allows the feeding process to go much smoother and much quicker. Mm-hmm. So I do that. Yes.
Okay. And snuggle safes for everybody. They're these pink discs you stick in the microwave, and I love them. I have several because they maintain their heat level for
a long
like
time.
12 hours almost.
And make sure you buy the fleece covers that go over them. You can't put a bunny on the plastic. It has to be with the fleece in between.
Yes.
So that they're on fleece. And I also have a formula. It's called, I don't know what it's called. I can't remember, but you buy it in a baby store. It's like a bottle warmer, but instead I put a jar in it with some formula, and you can control the heat. So I only put a little bit in, because like, let's say I have a litter of 5, right? I don't want the 5th guy to get the dregs, right? So I'm always trying to make sure everybody gets a little fresh formula.
Sure.
But the first guy, I have I have 2 jars. So I have the jar that's in the baby warmer, the bottle warmer. I have another jar on the side that's still got a little formula in it. So what I do is, after I feed the first one, and he's all set, clean his little mouth off, make sure he doesn't have formula. Usually they don't, but once in a while they're a little messy. And then I pour a little bit of the formula into the bottle warmer container and put this one back and take the second one, because now the second guy gets the fresh milk too. He gets a little of the old milk, but he gets some fresh milk, right? And it's never burning. You know, if you fill it all in and you leave it there, it stagnates kind of. So I try to do it in stages so everybody gets a little bit of the new and nobody gets left out. That's another big bit I do, and it makes it more palatable to them, because temperature is key to rabbits when they're doing their formula. I have rabbits that will not drink unless it's a certain temperature, period, end of story. I have to sit there with them and say, okay, I'm making it a little warmer for you. I know you like it warmer. And they're different. So, you know, some rabbits will just take it and guzzle it. Others, no. So temperature does matter.
Okay. So snuggle safe. You've got the fleece over, 4 feet on the floor. Or on the floor, on the snuggle safe.
Yeah, hopefully it's not on the floor.
Not on the floor.
Although that has happened.
I this is a little bit of an aside story of one of the people that I've met that has the Zen with rabbits, right? When they were old enough that, you know, they were moving around, didn't need to be in such a small space. They had a big, actually not a big, but a building or a shed or something that they reconfigured for rabbits. And so they were kind of on the floor. I mean, they weren't not free, but you know, they were there. And he would go in and he would just tell me about this because he couldn't let anybody else in there. And he would sit on the floor and he'd have the formula just, you know, and this is when they were weaning, and they would hop up to him, grab that nipple, suck it right on down. And he would just be sitting there on the floor with the money.
Because it's so natural for them. You know, you are a stranger and you are a predator.
Oh, exactly.
But at least some of the things around them are more natural. You know, and I also try to transition them to dish feeding when I can too. You know, as soon as I can get them off of and there's a couple caveats with that, because you always have the piggies, you know, so the first time you dish feed them, forget it. You're probably going to have to syringe feed them all too. So just know that, because they step in it, dance in it, splatter it all over the cage. They don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Once they get the hang of it, there are usually, like if there's a litter of 5, I would say 3 of them will guzzle the formula that's in the dish, but you have to maintain checking their weights.
Sure.
Because there's always somebody who's not doing it, and you're going to have to syringe that one. They're a little bit slower, and you're going to have to syringe feed that one. So you don't just put the dish in and say, okay, have at it. You've got to still monitor. It's still a closely monitored situation. And usually what I find is if I put the dishes in at night, like even if I'm feeding them, like let's say I feed them by syringe in the morning so I can test their weights, and then at night I dish feed them, right? I will usually cover their cage 3/4 of the way, right? So that if I walk in the room or something, they can still see outside, but they're not seeing me.
Sure.
And I leave them that way overnight or for several hours, depending, because I have air conditioning, so it's not going to all curdle. But if it's warm, I would not leave it more than a couple hours. But usually if I do that at night, they're very active at night and they will drink it. Okay. So I notice that most of the time the formula is just gone.
Do you think that the formula, when they are drinking it, because temperature, you said, was very important, right? I mean, how do you
struggle with that?
Right, because it's not going to stay warm.
No, I put it in my bottle warmer. That's how I warm it, because it warms slowly and I can control it. And you have to see me because the bunny room is at the other side. So it's like I'm trying to get this formula back there while it's hot and like put it in their little, I have everything set up. Their little dishes are set up. And once they get the hang of it, they're over at the dish and they're like lapping at the empty dish, right? Because they're looking for the formula. So I get it in there as quickly as I can. And then usually they'll eat it. And sometimes I don't put it all in. I'll put a little in. I'll wait an hour. I'll go back. I'll see what they've eaten. Sometimes I'll put a second round in. A second course, to see what they do. Because you're right, the temperature can affect whether they drink it or not. So it depends, but I'm not going to hover over them and watch them drink it because they don't usually drink it as well when you're standing there. They like to be on their own and independent.
Totally makes sense. Okay. The direction I'm going here before we really dig into formula is I was thinking about talking about enclosures. All the way through. So when you first get them, when their eyes are closed, for example, what does that housing look like? And then at each stage of development, what does that housing look like? How many will you put in an enclosure together?
Right, that's important.
Those kinds of things. So you first get it, young ones in. We know that you're going to black box and you're going to warm them up. But let's say their eyes are closed. And so what does your enclosure look like for those rabbits?
It depends, because I don't usually use the incubators as much because what I found was in the incubators, even when I had, for me, I mean, these are rabbits, right? They would climb out of the whatever container that they were in. Like if I put them in something with the fleece in it, they would still come out because it was warm. The whole thing was warm, right? But I wanted them to stay nested and I was having difficulty with that. And I probably need maybe the little incubator, kind of thing. And also I found that the incubators dehydrate the rabbits at a rapid rate. So I had gotten, and maybe they're better now, but I had gotten a reptilian thermometer so I could do humidity and I also know that the incubators, most of them have the tray, so you can put the water in for humidity, but that was not enough. I would take like a jar and put like a sponge in it with water so that the rabbits would drown when they climbed out of their little nest, but just so it would add extra humidity to the environment. And I would have to replace that jar at least 3 times a day.
Wow.
I mean, it was that dehydrating. So I don't like to leave them in there because they're so fragile as it is and they become dehydrated and that's like just so bad for them. So I tend to keep them in like a little, actually it's one of the best things. And we gave them out at our last meeting for the CWRA, which was a plastic container, storage container that you would find, you put your sweaters in it or something. And we cut out the top and we added a screening so that there was enough air to get in. And we hot glued them to the sides. And so I use those because they're great. I line it with fleece and I have this is the OCD. I have a very specific way of lining the fleece because I never want someone to get out and be on the plastic, at the bottom. So I line the fleece a certain way. I put them in the nest. It's like a process that I should probably video. And then I always put some hay in. Powdered hay, cut up hay, but something, because, when the rabbits are in that nesting area, they're nibbling on things, whether it's the dirt around them or whatever it is. They're not in there for 24 hours a day waiting for mom and not doing anything.
Right.
So I think it's important that they get that fiber because fiber is key to the rabbit's digestion because they're hindgut fermenters and they need that fiber. That is going to keep the diarrhea away. They need fiber. So I always put it in with them. So I get them used to it right away. So even though their eyes are closed, they may not eat it. I don't care. They're familiar with it. And I think they probably do nibble on it to some degree. And I usually try to get the powdered hay at the bottom of the hay so that it's really powdery and it's easier for them to nibble on,
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Because I've always done, hay and things
they
like that.
They don't eat the big hay for me.
But
Right. And you can also cut it up. But they're still, when they're that little, they're not really eating the hay. So I even take the powdered stuff from one bag and add it to a separate bag. So I had a bag of just the powdered stuff. So that I could always go in and get some for the neonates.
Sure. Oh, I know. I love that suggestion.
And even for the ones that are a little older, when I put the regular hay, I would sprinkle some of that on because then they could find the little bit too.
The little bits.
Because, it might be overwhelming for them having a big piece of fiber, So
well, and it would, right? Because
Yeah.
in most of their nests, they might have dried
that,
grasses.
so I don't see it. Right.
Right. They're going to have dried grasses, which
Yep.
are smaller
Yep.
and not the big stemmy pieces and things like that.
Yeah, softer.
Yep. Softer. Right.
So that's what I do. And I sometimes order what's called, it's a mix of Timothy and cut and clover hay. Okay. And the rabbits love that too. And it's softer. So I will do that. Mm-hmm. And I do alfalfa once in a while. You know, like I don't get them all alfalfa, but alfalfa is soft, little, and they will eat it, even though it's not the healthiest for the babies. Sure. If they're going to get some fiber in them and I can mix it up a little, I'm good. And it's sweeter and they usually like it.
Right.
But I don't do that as their main. Yeah, it's not the only thing they get.
Okay.
And then, but I start them at that age. And then I let them dictate, right? I don't know. I wait, like some days I go to work, now their eyes are open, but they're still in the nest and everything. I'll go to work, I'll come home and all of them are sitting lined up on top of the fleece looking at me. And they look like little puffballs. I'm like, what happened between this morning and now? Right? They're totally different. And at that point, I know they need more space, right?
Okay.
Because the last thing you want is to have them in a tiny space where, you know, they're stepping in each other's fecal. This is how like the disease and the diarrhea and all that form. And stress is a big causer of it. So they need to have more space. The problem is that some of the caging the bars are too wide. Sure. So I go through a couple of cages as they grow. Okay. Depending on how long they have to be with me. Right. But, and also all of my cages, because rabbits are perimeter runners. So all of my cages have plastic or something along the bottom for about maybe 5 inches, 6 inches. 4 inches, whatever it is on those cages. This way, when they're running the perimeter, they're not seeing anything outside. You know, I don't want them to see, you know, whatever's, you know, in the room kind of thing. I mean, they're in their own room.
I see. Okay. So that barrier is a visual barrier.
Correct. Visual.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they always have a hidey hut. And their hideaway has at least 2 entrances, because if you know anything about rabbits, they always need a getaway. It's the only way they're going to survive. And, they love their hideaways. Mm-hmm. And I also put...
now, do you make those or do those...
I buy them usually. I mean, you can use a Kleenex box, you know, the square Kleenex boxes if you want to, and just cut another hole, right? Mm-hmm. And that's easy. I buy them. I will reuse them. I know we're in the era of RHTV2, but I will reuse them as long as they remain clean. Mm-hmm. You know, meaning that the rabbits ran through them, but nobody had diarrhea. Nobody did anything in the tunnels. And I have one that I love that's like literally, it looks like a tree, but it's got openings, like several openings. And what I do is I put fleece in the bottom so that if somebody pee-pees, that I can pull it out and it's not destroying the straw, because it's all straw.
Oh, right.
So I put fleece in the bottom. I usually drape fleece over the top, you know, so that they can tunnel in, tunnel out, because they like those kinds of things, but they love doing that kind of thing. Okay. And I will usually, even at that point, when they're really not looking for the heat, I will put heat somewhere, like a hand warmer or something under the fleece in a corner, just in case that one rabbit wants to sit on something warm. And sometimes they do. Oftentimes they don't care once they get to a certain age. And you'll know because they won't be sitting on the heat, you know, so you'll know that they're not really into it. Right. And I create the cage setting in a certain way so that I can leave the rabbits in the cages as they're getting bigger. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to, like, I can clean half the cage at one time and half the cage at one time. So the rabbits in the hideaway stay. Okay. So they're in their hideaway, then I slide the hideaway over and I clean the other half. Okay. And I use paper towels. And the reason I use paper towels is because it's a great substrate to see if they have any kind of diarrhea, like change in their fecal, change in their urine. Right. I can see it easily and immediately. Mm-hmm. So that's why I do it. And it's also easy to clean. I do give them piles of hay. Like my rabbits usually will tunnel through the hay. You know, that's what
so when you're giving hay, so trying to get a picture in my head, you've got the base of the container has paper towels. Do you do layers of paper towels or just like?
No, you probably could, but usually when they urinate, it goes through or they spill their water, you know, you're going to have to change the whole thing anyway. So I usually do like 2 or I see, it depends on the rabbits. If I have one rabbit, I might be able to keep like just sheets of 2 and not, you know, it might not be messy. If I have 5 rabbits, I might do 3, you know what I mean, to absorb more.
Sure.
And also I usually keep part of, and depending on the hideaway I have, I usually keep the part where the hideaway is with fleece on the bottom, because they're used to that still, and fleece on the top, like I'll drape it. But I also, if it's like, sometimes you get those little hideaway huts, I will put fleece around the edges, because I've had young rabbits jump off instead of going down the side, and they've injured themselves. I've had soft tissue injuries.
Okay.
So I will put fleece around the edges of it so that they can walk down kind of, they don't have to jump off.
Sure.
And I've also done little hammocks once they're really older and I put them outside and they're in a bigger cage. I'll do hammocks out of fleece and they'll sit and they'll look outside up above the barrier. So they want to see what's up there.
Yeah, but I've done hammocks before too. It's just like, wow.
And really they love it. I have photos of it and it's hysterical because they do love it. And then, when they're inside, so once they're old enough and now they're in that second, third cage, I leave them in my back room and they face a window, and I can leave the window open or I can put on a sound soother, but I make sure only 3 sides of the cage are covered. So they always see day, night, because I want them to know the timing. I don't want them to be in the dark. Right.
Right.
And then once they're old enough and I can watch them, only supervise, I will put them out on my patio. So I'll be inside here doing something on my computer and they'll be right outside. So I can check on them periodically because I've had a hawk swoop down.
Oh, sure.
And I can just watch them from here. And this way they get acclimated. They see the birds, they see everything, the squirrels, the chipmunks, and they become attuned to their sounds. Like, what's a warning? What's why did it become quiet all of a sudden? I want them to know that. So I do that. And I also bring in things. So I purchased apple and pear branches, sticks for them to chew on. Okay. I will use antlers, not processed, not from the pet store. If you find an antler outside, that's what I would use. And you can put it in your oven and heat it for a while so you kill any organisms kind of thing that are on it.
Like it's low heat, like 250 degrees 200,
for 250.
An
hour.
I do it
with pine cones.
Yeah.
Off, that kind of thing, because I just don't want that stuff in there. Like you put your clothes in the dryer to get rid of ticks, right? I would put it in there in the oven for a little bit on a cookie sheet, get rid of whatever. And I'll give them pine cones. I'll even get like a branch, and I usually don't get it from the ground. I will cut a little branch of like an oak tree or certain evergreen trees that I know they like, and I'll bring those in because I want them acclimated to what the stuff is. What's the smell? What does it feel like? Sometimes they nibble on them and eat them.
Sure. And they can figure out, well, what am I going to eat? Yeah. Because they have to experiment.
I don't wait 21 days. There's a rule. You wait 21 days to start them on greens. I don't do that. If my rabbits are eating and my rabbits are running around, I will introduce them to a little bit of grass. I'll bring it in, or a little clover, and I'll see how they do. And I'll leave it there for a little bit. They usually love the grass. None of it's got pesticides, by the way.
Sure.
And I always rinsed it before. So it's got a little extra hydration there. And that's what it would be if it was dewy outside or whatever.
Right.
And put that in. And they usually love that. And as they transition, that's how we go. I'll add more and more.
And do you put that stuff in a dish?
Nope.
Or is it kind of sprinkled?
Because they wouldn't have it in a dish in the wild. I put it in their cage. Usually if they're in their hideaway, because they don't want to see me, I'll put it by one of the entrances to the hideaway. So that they can just reach out and grab it, which they do.
Sure.
So they don't have to come out and see.
Right. Okay. Right.
So yeah, I'll do something like that. And then I'll, progress. They'll get dandelion leaves. They'll get, different things that I plantain, but I don't bring those in right away because I think I think the dandelion would be fine, but I don't want to try anything at once. I know they love the blades of grass. I know they love the clover. Right. But the plantains, I think, are a little more difficult to digest or eat, so I wait till they're older for that, but they do love them. And I will give them organic kale. It's like crack for bunnies. My bunnies love the kale. I have a funny story. I released bunnies in Greenwich at this private property because I had a couple problem bunnies and the guy was keeping an eye on them. And I had released a bunch of bunnies. And I brought another cage over with a couple bunnies that I was going to release. And this big adult bunny came running right up to the cage. And I'm sure it's because they thought they were going to get kale or rolled oats, because rolled oats are definitely bunny crack. And what I do is when they're eating really well, I'll take a couple regular rolled oats and drop them into the hay pile. So they have to forage to get it. And they do. Yeah, they do.
Okay.
So, yeah, but that's what I'm saying, like mirroring nature as much as possible. You could even bring some dirt in because rabbits like dirt and they do like nibble or whatever because it's mineral, right? So, and they dig in dirt. So I would say if you have like a little pan of dirt or something, or bring in a little dirt, that's not a bad thing either, as long as you know it's like, not like pesticide treated kind of thing.
Right. Right. And depending on the size of the enclosure too, and how many rabbits you have, because you don't want to do all these things all the time.
Yeah.
In there,
well,
you wouldn't have
I
any room
usually
for the
put them in
rabbits.
a pretty big cage by the end. So, if they have a little dirt over here, it can have grass on it or hay on it, like it doesn't matter. That's what they'd find in the wild. You know what I mean? Like, I don't worry about that so much, but you're also going to be throwing it out when you clean the cage, unless you have it in something. Kind of a tray.
Before we go, description of the other enclosures, how often do you clean?
Every day.
Every day.
Every morning.
Every morning. And then when you are, some of the pieces and parts of the enclosure kind of stay there. Do you clean absolutely everything? No. I usually would change whatever animal I'm working with, only part of it.
Correct.
Because I want to keep the smells the same.
The substrate changes, but I will keep, I will often take some of the hay, all the hay out, because they sometimes poop in it. So I don't want them walking around and eating it. So if it's something like that, I take it all. But if I have something like the apple sticks and they all stay. All that stays. And the only time the fleece comes out is if they really soil it. Otherwise it stays, because it can just be maintained there.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So they're in this kind of the plastic container that you have the cover, which you have cut part of it out and
put. That's the incubator, so to speak.
Right. We used to make it before incubators were really available for rehabilitators. We used to make incubators like that. We'd have two bottom parts of the plastic container, whatever size, and the bottom would have the water.
Oh, yes.
You would put like an aquarium heater in that, and then the top would have the same thing that you described, the cover cut. So you'd put the mesh, and then you'd put if you needed less humidity, you'd prop open you'd actually have little windows on the top, so that crude, but it was very effective.
No, some rehabbers still use that kind of a system, and they sell it now too.
Oh,
there's a system like that they sell, where you put that you can put, it's like the same concept, where it's like a watery thing or whatever in between, and you have some people do use it. Yep.
Yeah.
So
excellent. But that's cool. When you were describing that, I'm like, wait, I recognize that.
Yep.
What is that?
And I usually, what I didn't say is I have it's from, I want to say like Chewy or something, and it's a mat that's for pets, like if your cat or your dog wanted to sit on it, or maybe a smaller animal, a ferret. And it's just a warmer, and I got the covering for it, like a rug covering, and I put that under their plastic container, so it keeps it warm, a little warmer.
Excellent.
But it's not like I don't have to keep putting a hand warmer in it every 5 minutes. So I do have a warming element for that too. Yes. And I only do it on half the cage.
Right.
I do
so they can
on
choose.
The incubator half where their nest is, but they can also come out. Like I find they come out and they crawl around in the other fleece that I have set up with my OCD, so that they can, tunnel and stuff. So they're not all in the nest that I built. They do come out.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So now they're old enough that you would like to graduate them to a different size cage or enclosure. What does that look like? That's
the one that has the bottom barrier. And it has, I have pictures of all these. Actually, they were in my one of my presentations, and they went in order. And then it has bars, hardware. And usually the best kind of cage to have for people is the kind where you can go in through the side, because when you're coming in from the top with a rabbit, that's predatory. So that's something to consider. Going in through the side to do a lot of things. Now, sometimes when I clean them, I have to go in through the top. They're in their hideaway, and they know me by then. But yes, it's definitely a predatory thing. So it's something to, again, you're mirroring nature. So if you think about how nature works, you're going to know that you need a side opening.
Right.
And I have different grades of those that graduate in size.
Okay.
So the first one's pretty small, because I don't want to put them in a huge space, because they're not going to understand that. And I think it'll stress them. Maybe it won't. So I put them in a medium space, and the bars are thinner, so they can't escape, because I've had rabbits escape. That's other stories. And then I put them into a larger, and then if they're still with me, I put them into a larger. So there's several different kinds that I have stacked up that I can just switch them over.
Okay.
Depending on how many rabbits and, how big a space they need. And then I can put in, for the large one, I can put in a couple of hideaways. You can do different things so they can really spread out.
Okay. But a lot of the same elements are still on the inside. I
still keep the same kind of elements in there and I still, do the paper toweling, but maybe it would be in several sections, not just two,
Okay. Excellent. Well, and in our resources, we'll have Deborah has graciously agreed to share one of her presentations with her photographs, so you can kind of see what we are discussing and describing here. So let's get into formula, and let's get into what you use, why you use it, specifically, how you feed, how much you feed. We'll talk a little bit more about stimulation, and then maybe some of the problems that people might see, like diarrhea, and kind of what kind of things you should think about when you're trying to deal with some of the challenges. So, okay, formula, go.
Formula, that's a tough topic. And I know that people have all different kinds of formula. Some of the older rehabilitators have transferred down certain recipes and people follow that, and it's worked in the past. Some of us use commercial, formulas we find for rabbits on the market. Everyone has their opinion about which one works the best.
Sure.
Which is fine. I have used for rabbits S3E4. I never had a problem. Fox Valley, never had a problem. And now I use Wambaroo. Still haven't had a problem.
And Wambaroo is out of Australia.
Yes, right? Out of Australia. I love Wambaroo. The rabbits love Wambaroo. I think it's just the flavor, whatever they have in it. And it also has an oil in it that I think kind of coats their digestive tract a little. But the one thing I would say for people, no matter what formula you're using, already we went through, don't buy the bargain, because it's probably not what you're not getting. You're getting what you pay for. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And two, make sure you read the ingredients, because, when I started with S3E4, I was adding L-glutamine and lactobacillus to my formula. But now S3E4, I think, puts in the probiotic. You know what I mean? So you really have to look at the ingredients, because sometimes the manufacturers change and you don't want to overload the animal on any one ingredient that's not going to be healthy. Two, I would say, again, this goes under my less is more. There are people that add all kinds of things to formula. I've got to fatten them up. I've got to do this. I've got to, mom's milk. In my Down the Rabbit Hole presentation, I went through a big research thing on mom's milk. And mom's milk does change over time. Obviously, our formula is not really changing over time.
Exactly.
Right. So we are missing something in there as we go. And some rehabilitators have been experimenting with different things that we could possibly do to improve. Right. The one thing I would say is probably know about your formulas as much as you can. I have gone to, I don't know if anyone's familiar with eWild again, but they have a calculator on there. So you can you can compare your formula and how you're doing it to what it would look like in the microsecond that they have of a one time
mom's milk, right?
Mom's milk, yeah,
right.
It's not going to go over time; it's an instant in time. And so you can compare it and see. And I did this in the Down the Rabbit Hole, and it was amazing to see how deficient some of the formulas are, or how they go so much over what the mom's milk is, so that it's not even close to what she has for them. I like the Wambaroo, I think, and it's also balancing the water aspect. It's water to the powder.
Right.
So, for example, the Wambaroo, I think, is 2-to-1, if I remember, and I could be wrong, but just say it's whatever it is, it's too thick for the rabbits. I can't use that formula for the rabbits. I always have to dilute it for them.
Huh. Okay.
I don't care if they eat more, because sometimes they'll eat more because it's watery, right? A little bit. So let's say when you said, how much do I feed them? All my rabbits eat 7 to 10% normally, right?
7 to 10% of their body weight.
Right.
Okay.
If they're not eating and they're fussy, I know there's something wrong. That's the first indication. You don't need to see the diarrhea. Okay. If they're not eating, there's a problem. Okay. So that's the first thing you should be assessing. Is it that they're dehydrated and they need more fluids? Is the formula getting gutted up and knotted up in their digestive tract? Because that's going to be ugly. So there's something wrong. So that's your first indicator. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like tube feeding, because if you're tube feeding, you don't get that window. Okay.
Sure.
So you miss that sign. Okay. And that can sometimes be life or death.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that when they're eating their 7 to 10%, sometimes, like I said, because the Wombaroo is diluted a little more, I will let them eat a little more. They might eat 11%, 12%, but you don't want them to bloat. So you've got to watch that. You don't want them to have too much, right? To have to deal with.
Right.
So, I would have rabbits that would keep going, and I have to stop them because they don't know what's good for them. And I do.
That sounds like raccoons. I don't know. I mean, raccoons will just eat, and some squirrels too.
Yeah.
Will just
and they don't realize the damage they're doing. So you have to be the control for that.
Mm-hmm.
But, maybe for your rabbits, and this is sometimes for mine, like if they're not gaining weight the way I want them to, maybe I'll input another feeding. So I'll layer in a third feeding, you know what I mean? So they can get a little bit more. And maybe they only eat maybe 4 mLs at that feeding. That's okay. That middle feeding. I just want them to get that little extra, right? They don't have to eat 7 to 10% of their body weight at every feeding if I'm layering in an extra feeding, right?
Right. So, okay, I'm going to just make you pause for just a second. Okay. So because rabbits in the wild cottontail rabbits are generally feeding at dawn and dusk. The mom is coming dawn and dusk, and that's a way to protect her babies from predators.
Right.
You're mimicking that. So you're trying to do an early feeding and a late feeding.
Correct.
About 10 to 12 hours apart?
Correct. About 12 hours apart. I try to do it like dawn dusk.
Okay. And that's where that percentage body weight comes in.
Right.
Right. The what did you say? 7 to 10%, 7 to 10% of body weight. And as everybody knows, we're not going to tell you a specific number of mils to feed or anything
because the rabbits differ.
Because the rabbits differ. It's based a lot on body weight and their development.
Right.
Right. So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Just to make sure people know, which is very different than when you're feeding young squirrel at the same developmental age as a rabbit or raccoon or birds. Oh my God, birds.
Every 15 minutes.
Yeah, I know. So we ain't going there, but rabbits are different because of their natural history.
Right.
And so knowing their natural history, to me, is one of my guiding principles, which is so similar to yours.
Yes, which is part of mine. Yes.
Right. Is
knowing their history.
Natural history will tell you a lot about how to rehabilitate whatever it is.
If you're mirroring nature, that's exactly what you're going to be doing.
Exactly.
And so there was another point in there and I'm going to forget it again because I'm thinking about so many things. My brain is shooting, but you said something that triggered something for me. That's really important for the rabbits as well.
Dawn and dusk.
Oh, dawn and dusk. It's, thank you. It's, when you think of rabbits, unlike any other species mammal species that we deal with, they are full grown and released in like 3 weeks, maybe 4, right?
Right.
Do a lot of growing in that time. So another reason why I adhere to the mom's schedule is because I think it's so the babies can absorb those nutrients and rest and their body grows. Like when I say that I leave for work in the morning and their eyes are open and their ears are up and they still look like little babies, and then I come home and they're fluff balls, like what happened? And that was only 8-10 hours, so they grow very quickly and they need the downtime. So going in every 5 minutes to check on them and disturb them, or going in saying, I'm going to feed them a little more water, I'm going to do this. Once they're stabilized and you have them on a routine, you should let them be. And really try to adhere to nature because there's a reason why it's done that way. And again, that's why they should remain with mom. But if they can't and they're with us, then, and sometimes we have to interrupt that pattern, right? For, to enable them to be releasable. But if you can, leave them be, let them just sleep for 12 hours. You don't have to look at them.
Right. Okay. So in general, we have a formula. There's different formulas that you can try. You're using distilled water to
correct
mix that formula. You when you first get a youngster in and you're transitioning, you've given them Pedialyte, they've eaten that, you're kind of prepping their body not only for hydration, but you're prepping their body for a new formula, right? You go 25% concentrated formula, then 50%,
50 and 75.
Yep. And then 75 and then 100%. And you try to do that over the course of 24 hours.
Yes and no. Yes, if the rabbits are properly hydrated. If I have rabbits that are really dehydrated, I need to get them up to speed with hydration before I get them to full formula. So they will not get full formula. It might take me 2 days.
Okay.
You know, the rabbits, just because you give them Pedialyte, aren't hydrated.
Right.
So if there's a problem with them and their hydration, then you want to make sure that you have them at that hydration point, or they're not going to metabolize the formula at all.
Okay. Right.
So it's an important thing to know. And the other thing I was going to say about the formula is how you make it. You know, you always do the water first. It's like, how is it redistributed? How you redistribute the formula. It should be the water first, and then the formula. So the water's heated to a specific temperature, and then you're adding in the formula. So it gets to dissolve the way it needs to be, like dissolve, I should say, the way it needs to. And even though things like the Wombaroo say you can feed it right away, it still needs hours to settle. Like, you really should give it some time to dissolve, because otherwise you're putting that into the rabbit's digestive tract and it's not dissolved. It's not even ready for them to be able to absorb. So you want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And all formula should be done that way. It should really be done the water first and then the powder.
Okay.
How you do it and let it dissolve into, and it does take a little time. And for my rabbits, I do add a pinch of L-glutamine. And for the Wombaroo, I do add a little acidophilus or probiotic. So, but and in my down the rabbit hole, out of the studies I found, which there's not a lot of studies, but on rabbit nutrition, but L-glutamine does help, and it's technical, but it helps with the villi and the intestines to stand straighter. So it's more absorption, but it's in the research, in the presentation, and the acidophilus actually makes the difference, can make a difference too. So those are two additives I would say could make a difference. Even though less is more, those are two that can help.
So, and feeding instruments. So are you using syringe and miracle nipple? Are you using syringe and what?
I use the syringe with the miracle nipple. And it's fine. I just purchased, and I haven't used it yet because I really haven't been taking rabbits with school because I have so much on my plate. And again, the animal's always first. So if I take in an animal, I have to put the animal before my school. So I'm trying to be as prudent as I can. But I purchased a kitten feeder that's got like 4 nipples on it. So that's my next step, is to try and see if I can get 4 rabbits to drink the formula at one time. And they don't need me. It's just like you sit it down.
Oh my gosh, just like fawns. You set up a bottle rack.
Yes. And that's what it is. It's kind of like that, but I don't know if the nipples on it are okay. And I was going to try to play and see if I could put the miracle nipples in. Like, so there's work to be done. That's what I was looking at, because I thought that would be neat. But I also will use a syringe without a nipple if I have a rabbit that I feel is like, let's say that rabbit that doesn't want to eat anything, right? I will know that they need some water. So I will get them that. But I also want to get some fiber into that gut. So I will usually take some critical care or some powdered hay and put it in the syringe with the water. Put it in the water with the water, and then put it into the syringe. And if you're using the syringe, you can't get it through the nipple.
Through the nipple, right.
But I can get it through the syringe if it's powdered, and it's very diluted, right? From what we're seeing, but I don't care. It's getting fiber into that belly.
Right.
So I do try to do that for some of my rabbits. It's hydrating them extra, but it's also getting some fiber in that's good for their digestive system.
Right.
So when I notice that, that's what I will do. And that's why I say the people who hand feed or syringe feed, we all hand feed. If you syringe feed, you have one leg up on the people that tube feed, because you're going to notice before they do. Okay. So I think we got the basics on formula and technique and, equipment. So then let's talk about some of the problems you might have briefly. So one of the ones, of course, we've kind of touched on just a tiny little bit, is diarrhea. So how do you first, of course, preventing it is number one. And number two, however, if you're catching it soon enough,
where it's starting, hopefully, right? I mean,
Yep.
and like you said, they develop so fast and everything
Yep.
seems fast. It may not be fast, but it seems fast. And then all of a sudden, we have to wait for it to come out of the body. Then
Right.
maybe that's what we're
Right.
noticing, right? So what do you do?
Well, the first thing is you've got to stay ahead with hydration. Okay. With any diarrhea, bunnies dehydrate so quickly and so easily that it's very difficult to stay ahead of the diarrhea. That's why we lose them most of the time, is because it can be very painful for them, by the way. Sure. Just like for humans, I guess, if it's the enteritis or, I want to make sure that I keep the cage extra clean, right? Because if a rabbit has diarrhea, another rabbit steps in it, then they start to groom, now you've got a problem, right? So you may even want to consider separating that rabbit from the others, which I often do most of the time. I will separate them. Put them in their own cage with heat, usually, not a lot of heat, but a little heat to keep them warm. Oftentimes, it depends. You start with the antibiotics and things, and is it going to work at that point? Because it's already at a point where they're so uncomfortable. I usually will try to keep up with the hydration, maybe add in a meloxicam because it's an anti-inflammatory.
Right.
If I think a Bactrim or something, it's a broad spectrum antibiotic, I might use something like that if I feel like it's bad and I need to. But usually if it's that bad, you're beyond the point of no return kind of thing. Okay. It's really tough to get them back if they're that little. So catching it early and starting some of these, protocols, especially the hydration, the fiber is key. Rabbits need the fiber. And I think what a lot of rehabilitators don't realize is that the cecum plays such an important role in their
we
digestion.
haven't even talked about the cecum yet.
No. And the thing is that when they get diarrhea and it's due somewhat to that malfunctioning or not functioning, so they're not getting nutrition, they're not gaining weight, they're having diarrhea, and their cecum's not functioning, we can't really fix that. That's something that mom triggers usually, and I guess the colostrum, whatever triggers. The fiber is the one thing in our arsenal that is the best for helping to stop that, because the cecum needs the fiber as well as the digestive tract.
Right.
So that's the huge, and there are all forms of diarrhea. And again, that's in this presentation. So it'll talk about the shapes, the size, the color, so you can see what's abnormal, what's normal. This one means dehydration. This one means, bacterial, so there are things. And I also think, coloring, I had rabbits that had diarrhea. I had 11 of them. It was horrible. So I had 9 of them and I had 2 come in. So I felt like they'd be comfortable if I put them with the other 9. Big mistake. And all of a sudden they all started getting sick and dropping one by one. And I had their fecal tested and nothing came through. They didn't have anything like coccidia or anything. And so I had 2 of them necropsied. So I paid $200 to have these 40-gram things necropsied. Sure. And it turned out it was Klebsiella. Nobody tests for Klebsiella in fecal normally. And rabbits don't normally get Klebsiella, but these rabbits had it. And that's the other thing you have to consider is the herd mentality. By me putting those 2 rabbits in with those 7, I lost all of them. 9, I guess it was. Right. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had them on antibiotics, but it didn't matter. It was just rampant right through. Yeah.
And that's just cautionary tale. We have to know the risks, the risk benefit analysis, and know it going in. Right. It's not just, yes, it's about, maybe them getting along and all that kind of stuff. And there's stresses involved with that, but that we might be introducing disease. In season 1, we had a whole episode talking about rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2, which is RHDV2. And that's something that all of us that do anything with rabbits have to know, and have to know the different things that you should be doing to protect your different groups of rabbits. Yep. I actually wrote something for the IWRC on protocols for RHDV2 a while ago. It needs to be updated because now there is a vaccine in the States available, but the protocols as far as, making sure your areas are sterile, how do you try to keep it from other rabbits? How do you quarantine? How do you, all that's kind of in there. Right. And stipulated. And then some people would even put, painter's plastic between the cages,
Each cage would have a different setup. So there'd be paper, like if you're using paper towels for substrate, there'd be paper towels at each cage. You don't go across because you're cleaning that cage and you're, working with them. Nothing gets crossed.
So everything, every section
separate
has their supply of hay and their supply of formula, and there's a garbage can for that space. And gloves for that space if you're, cleaning everything. So you have to duplicate or everything.
And you go from the healthiest to the ones that you question, like if they're in quarantine. So your healthy ones are the ones you're going to work with first, and then you work your way back.
Yeah, so clean to dirty.
The injured ones are going to be more susceptible versus the ones that are healthy. And you don't want to go the other way because then you'll infect them, the healthy ones.
Right. And because it's so easy to do because we can't see this virus.
And it can be flies can bring it into the area. They can inhale it. I mean, there's so many ways for them to be infected. It's horrific. And I worry about that. And I will never mix rabbits like that again. I learned my lesson. And actually, when the veterinarian found the Klebsiella, he contacted me and he said, I want to go through all your protocols. What do you do?
Excellent.
How do you clean? How do you this? How do you that? We went through everything and my protocols were stellar, except for one where I put them in the cage. And he said to me, that's when he brought up the herd mentality. And he said, if you have like a singleton and you don't want it to be a singleton and you have 7 in another cage, take one of the 7, put it with the singleton. Don't put the singleton with the 7.
Right. That makes sense. Oh, man, that's excellent advice, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's that risk benefit analysis. And yes, you might be risking that one, but you're not risking the whole.
The other 6. Right.
Right.
And the other thing is that when they're in that kind of a situation, as soon as I notice the diarrhea, I clean the cage immediately. So I might have already cleaned the cage that morning and it might be 3 hours later, I'm cleaning it again. Because the rabbit that has the diarrhea is running around the cage. He's in the hay, he's not controlling it.
Right.
So these guys are going to ingest it. That's all we need. Right. So I definitely will clean the cage, move the other rabbit to another cage.
Right.
And try that way.
Okay.
And my other mistake is sometimes I move them back too quickly. Like the rabbit will be healthy again and bopping around and all fine. And then I put him back in the cage and he has diarrhea again. So make sure you wait the length of time. Like I was feeling like he was alone. He was missing his buddies, I'm going to put him back. Wait time because he got the diarrhea back.
Sure. Are there any other, things that in care that can happen, like the diarrhea, right? Because of mistakes that we've made or we're not catching it soon enough or whatever. But other things that people bloat, for example.
Bloat, usually it's not the rehabilitators that are the bloat.
Well, we hope that the rehabilitators don't have the bloat.
I would say the one thing that the rehabilitators deal with is aspiration pneumonia.
Okay.
Because the rabbit should be suckling. You have to be really careful because the rabbit can inhale so quickly and so easily if you don't let them suckle on their own or latch on. So there's a trick to it. Sometimes it's an angle in how you're angling the nipple. I notice with my rabbits, if I angle it a certain way, they latch on. If I don't angle it that way, it dribbles out of their mouth. You know what I mean? So you really got to kind of gently determine where is that sweet spot kind of thing. Where is the rabbit going to now suckle? And I also will, on that note, if one of my rabbits isn't eating so well, I might take out a second rabbit and put him on the heating pad with him and feed both of them. So that gets the survival of the fittest going. Mom only has so many memories. So they're all vying for him, right? She can have a big litter, sometimes 10, right? I'm sure she doesn't have that many nipples. So they're all vying for it. And she's only there for a short time because she's not attracting predators and they eat fast.
Right.
So if I bring a second one out, oftentimes the first one will start wanting to eat. And then what I have to do is alternate because you can't just keep feeding one and not the other one because, well, first of all, he'll be crawling all over everything and into everything. I had one that tried to crawl into the bottle container where I had the formula.
Oh, the poor little schmoo.
Yeah. Well, he knew
I'll get it myself.
Coming from. Yes, I can do. I can do.
I was
like, no, sweetheart, I don't think that's good for you. But so I've had some instances with that. The bloat, they usually come in with the bloat. And unfortunately, the bloat, that's a tough thing to get past if it's beyond a certain point, which I have photos of in one of my presentations, which is awful. We only fed them a little. Yeah, okay. But if a rabbit feels in discomfort, sometimes what I do, and I know this is going to sound weird, I will massage their tummy. Sometimes I'll massage their tummy, just lightly massage, trying to get whatever's in their body, like blobbed up to like kind of move, or, you know, there are certain medications to promote, you know, digestion, but on those guys that are so little, I don't know how well it will end up, so to speak. But if you have bloat, maybe there's no problem in trying. I do also use like the simethicone drops for infants. They say they don't really work, but I find sometimes that I can even feel the stomach gas go down on little rabbits. So I think they can work, but I think it depends on what it is. And with bloat, you know, I don't really know how you can get rid of it. Other people probably have more info on it. I find that when they come in that bad a shape, I euthanize them. If anything, I don't even, they're in so much discomfort. At least the photos I can show you, the two that I had, there was no turning back.
Right. Do you have, and you have been talking about them, criteria for, okay, this animal comes in with this type of bloat, or this too young, I euthanize. So do you have some criteria that you use that say, hey, for this, we are going to euthanize. For this, we may try, but if they don't improve, we're going to euthanize. And then these are really good to try to go forward. Yeah.
I think as rehabilitators, we try to save everything. And number one, we get overwhelmed, which is another less is more. You have to know your limits. But I think number two, you have to know when to let go. And I know when I first started, I wanted to save every single one of them, you know, but I also would stay up for 48 hours straight, and it didn't work. It wasn't boding well.
It's not good for you either. Yeah.
Right. And then as the rehabilitator, what's that doing, you know, and for the rest of the rabbits, right? So I look to, well, first of all, if you have a rabbit that comes in, especially like the tiny little kits, and they're lying on their side and they're not moving, right? People always send me photos. He's lying on his side. He looks comfortable. I'm like, no, he's probably dead. To put it bluntly, they're on their way out. I mean, most times, I mean, you can assess them if you can get them quickly enough, but odds are by the time that rabbit gets to you, it's going to be gone. They'll have crossed over. Two, an injury, like they're dragging around their hind legs. You know, any rabbit that's dragging around its hind legs, I do a pinch test on the toes.
On the toes, right.
See if they pull back and that, you know, they have a response. If there's no response, I also will feel down the spine to see if I can feel a break. Sometimes it's on one side and it's more pelvic, not the spine. But in those cases, those rabbits are euthanized. There's no way you're going to be able to rehab a stress species like that. Or I shouldn't say no way, but almost no way. You're going to be able to rehab a species like that, especially if they're already almost paralyzed and you're not going to be able to release them. So why are you putting them through this? Right.
Exactly. And when you're first learning how to assess back injuries, work with your veterinarian. This is just for everybody. Work with your veterinarian so you know exactly what to look for, because the nerve, you're pinching a toe, so it's supposed to hurt, right? But pain is in the brain. And so what we're trying to find out is, does the spinal cord, is it intact all the way to the brain? And that's what the pinch test is about. But what can happen is that the back could be partially severed or whatever, and the nerve will send a signal up to the back and back down. And so then it gives you this false impression that the animal feels it because there's a withdrawal, when in fact it isn't. But you have to know how to tell the difference. So that's where working with an experienced rehabilitator and working with your veterinarian to know this will help you a long way. Because if that spinal cord is severed, if the back is severed, we cannot fix that.
And it's humane to allow that baby to cross over rather than suffer. By prolonging it and keeping it and trying to rehab it, you're doing more harm than good. And that's not something we stand for. You know, we are there to help everyone, and that's our intention. And even the people who are holding on to them, that's their intention. But it's not happening. It won't happen. It can't happen.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm going to put a plug in here is that if you're a new rehabilitator, you do not have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to go through all this and go through all these learning things that this works, that this doesn't. You have a better place to start. There's lots of things still yet to learn. Don't get me wrong, but you have a place to start. So you can go to conferences, you can contact people like Deborah, you can listen to podcasts, you can, but there's a lot of resources out there, and more so now than there ever has been.
Right.
Now, yes, you have to be use your critical thinking hat, but so you have a good place to start. You're not starting completely on your own or blind or anything like that when you're trying to care for these animals. So that's my plug-in for continuing education and networking.
Yes, both of those are really important. And also there are some great books out there to use, whether you're doing the NWRA manual, the 48 Hours and Beyond, which was done by Dr. Irene Ruth and Deb. It's in good. I'm going to mask.
We'll get it right. We'll get it right. I've got the book.
Both of those books. And I will tell you, the first 48 Hours and Beyond, when I was a new rehabilitator, that was my Bible, because it goes through every species. It goes through, which I know the NWRA does now too. Well, does in more of an, let's say, more a reader-friendly format now than it did. It always had it as well. But this was my Bible back then. And it would go through all the stages, like what should they be eating? What should they look like? It's 5 days, 7 days, 11 days, how to do rehydration, how to tell how dehydrated they are. Like there are books out there that can guide you through it. And you just have to find of the good books, you have to find the one that you can understand the most and work with.
But starting with these two resources, I think are amazing. And I will put a plug in for, I've been doing rehab for a very long time, but that 48 Hours and Beyond book is still one of the ones I reach for.
Yeah, I love that book. That's my favorite book because it's so easy for me to read and find. That's the thing. The NWRA book used to be a big binder. It's not now. The good book now, or better book, I should say. They improved it. Content-wise, it was always a good book, but it was difficult for me to navigate. So I got that first 48 Hours and Beyond, and I love that book. And I still have people that contact me. I keep an older version in my trunk of my car because it's on edition 3 or 4 now.
Right.
I keep my good version in my house when I'm at home. But when I'm on the road, I'll get somebody calling me saying, "What's the dosage for blah blah?" And I'm like, "Okay, just hold on." And it tells you what the dose is to be by the weight, and it's amazing, really amazing, and it's very easy to use. So it's like a guide. Yeah.
Right. So again, we've got a lot of these resources out there. I mean, gosh, best practices is another one of my platforms that anybody who's listened to me for a little bit knows. I'm always talking about best practices, and best practices change, right? When I first started over 30 years ago, we didn't have formulas that we could purchase, except for maybe Esbelec and KMR, right? Right. But even that, when I first started, it's like, okay, we're going to do whipped cream and we're going to do, we were totally making it up as we went along, basically. And now again, you're starting at a better place. And so we always in some regards, but like for one thing, like the Fox Valley, whenever I use the Fox Valley, I would use the Ultra Boost with it because it's not of itself, it's not a nutritious enough for the rabbits. You need both. Right. What I found out recently is that the Ultra Boost is really like a whipping cream, like a real, like if you went and purchased whipping cream fresh versus using their packaged version, I would now purchase it fresh. You know what I mean? I wouldn't use the package because, unless it's more easier for you because you have it in your home. But I figure it's more ingredients that I don't know everything about, where I know what this is, it's pure. So it doesn't mean that all the old things are not viable. Oh yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Cause you're right. I mean, how do you think we got here? Right. We had to go through, and we try to carry forward the things that work, and work well. So, I want to talk a little bit about, release and what you do to prepare these animals for release, unless there's something else that I'm missing here.
Well, I was going to say there are other things that the animals can get, whether it's parasites.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Also soft tissue injuries. Also, there can be fractures in little kits. There are little fractures in little kits. Sometimes it can be splinted. If you're working with your veterinarian, sometimes it can be splinted. You can have okay results because the little bunnies, remember, are mostly cartilage. So they haven't really formed their bones yet. But you have to also remember that they need those feet to work because that's their defense. That's everything for them. Their speed, so if it's a fracture like we were talking about earlier, where it's the pelvis or the back, it's not going to heal the right way. If it's a little fracture in their paw, then maybe it could be splinted and it could heal the right way. And sometimes I've not even splinted them and they've grown a little crooked, but the rabbit is able to still function fine. So if that's the case, or if it's a soft tissue injury, you can manage those rabbits. Degloving is another big one. And I love degloving cases because all of mine have been released, which I'm very excited. And I get them periodically. And my treatment of them, my veterinarian, I know a lot of people like you do a wet to dry wrap, you do this, but my veterinarian was like, no. She's like, all I want you to do is clean the area, clip it, cleanse it. I usually use like a Vetricin or, you can even use saline solution if you want it to clean, but I like the Vetricin because it's got a medicinal. And then I use the silver sulfadiazine and I put that on. And you'll give them an oral med, obviously, an antibiotic. And what I would suggest to anyone who's going to undertake this is, one, it's not the whole rabbit that's degloved. It's a specific area that's degloved. Because if it's over their feet and they're degloved and their hindquarters, they may not ever heal because they're always moving, right? So it may be another euthanasia case. But if it's on their back and you wanted to try to do it, what I would suggest is take photos every day or every other day with your phone. Because when I first started, I didn't see any improvement. And when I started taking the photos, I realized how much improvement was happening over the days that I had the rabbit.
Oh, right.
So it made me feel better that I could see the improvement and I knew I was in the right direction. The other thing is you have to be careful of what you put in the cage on those animals, right? Because you don't want them catching it, their degloving area. So I don't put in anything with sharp edges. I usually make sure that the tunnels or the hideaways are high enough so that they don't have to scrape their back getting into them. So there's other things then you have to start thinking about with the rabbits.
Right.
But just keep that in mind. And then with the maggots and the cutiribras, I had the largest cutiribra anybody's ever seen in a rabbit. And I brought it to the vet because I did not want to deal with it. My vet took it in the back and everyone was squealing with delight because it was a cutiribra and it was huge.
It was ready to emerge anyway. And for those of you who don't know what cutiribra,
I mean, I've never seen one that big.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and they were all ecstatic because they see them often, but they were like, never like this. So of course I have a picture of him next to a pen in one of my presentations, but he was big. And I gave him to our internal medicine specialist because he loves all that like weird stuff. And I was like, do you want this? Oh, can I keep it? I'm like, sure.
Yes, please.
But so you have that and the maggots that you have to get rid of as well. The maggots can be difficult. And, some people believe in, inserting the capstar into the animal, like injecting it. I have my pros and cons with that because then the maggots die in the animal and that can cause other problems. I don't really know. I like capstar or something and get rid of the maggots. Anything on the outside I would get rid of course.
Right.
And you know what, if it's the case, which, I've seen before where the maggots are everywhere and they've just really destroyed the innards of the animal, let it go. Humane euthanasia. Don't put the animal through it. If the organs are compromised, don't put the animal through it.
Right.
But now we can go on to the other, because I think I covered
thank you. Thank you for bringing me back around to that. And I will never get out of my head the idea of the cutiribra, the largest one you've ever seen. Wiggling. Oh,
yeah. I had a video of it too. I don't know if it's there, but I have a video. It's so gross. It's creepy. It makes the skin crawl.
Yeah.
I'd rather see maggots than the cutiribra.
Oh, I'm the other way. I would rather have the cutiribra.
Well, the cutiribra is usually like 1, 2, or 3, right? It's not hundreds or thousands.
Right.
But the maggots you can sometimes wash off and they can just go. Right. But the cutiribra is still poking its head out. Ugh, disgusting.
Yeah, because it's definitely something foreign, and
Yeah. It's like the alien.
it's the alien. Oh yeah, exactly. Okay, we'll go on to something different.
Nice. Okay.
Let's talk about pre-release conditioning and release.
Okay.
What does that look like?
So as I said, I try to mirror nature as much as possible all the way throughout. So I have my rabbits in a separate room that's quiet. I have a window so they can hear the sounds from the time they're little. So from the time they're in one of those cages, outside of the incubator kind of setting, they are listening to outside sounds. They don't really know what it means being inside, but they see daylight, they see a sunset, kind of thing, dawn, sunset. They hear the sounds. So the next step would be for me to bring them outside, and I leave them there for hours, as long as I'm home. They're supervised.
Right.
But I will stay home again. The animal's always first. So you may have to not go sailing that day and sit at home with your rabbits. But I will sit with them and I'll be inside. I'll have them outside because I want them to be as natural as possible. I check on them through the window. I make sure I have a line of sight. And I'll leave them there probably 8 hours, 10 hours, maybe dawn to sunset kind of thing. Sometimes a little longer, as long as, I feel comfortable. And I will tell you that within 2 days, these guys are wild and ready to go. They're chewing on the cage bars. And I used to always have to carry this is one thing I will say, I used to have to carry my cages to the release site. And I used to do that because the rabbits were in their home setting that they were comfortable in.
Sure.
So I didn't really lose anyone, because you can lose a rabbit on release because they get so stressed they have heart failure. Right. And I know a lot of people will put them into a little carrier and bring them to the convenient spot, which is great, except it's all strange to them. The carrier's strange to them, the spot's strange to them. Now you're stressing them totally. So I try to do it so I bring something of theirs with them. So let's say I can't carry the big cage because I'm by myself and there's no one to help me. What I might do is either put them in a smaller cage with their hideaway, or some kind of carrier with their hideaway, their greens, their, whatever it is, so that at least they have that scent around them. They have their safety around them. And then when I bring them, and a lot of times when I release them, I will take the hideaway out and put it on the grass. So when they hop out of the cage, they see the hideaway right there. Yeah. And I always want to make sure they're comfortable. I never leave the site until everyone's in the woods kind of thing, or in the brush. Everybody's, because they all want to nibble on things and they're all, excited to be out there picking their own greens for one. And, but I make sure they're all hidden before I go. They can come out again, but I want them hidden so they can acclimate, and just settle. There was one time that I felt strongly that I had to go back the next day because I felt like this one rabbit wasn't doing it. And I went back and I found him there. He was still there. And he was sick by that point. I don't know what he did all night, but he was definitely sick and he ended up passing. But I was so glad I went back and he didn't pass out there by himself,
Sure.
So I brought him home. But at my house now, I have the luxury of just letting them go. So I open the side door of the cage.
Sure.
I put fleece on it because it's got the hardware, so their feet slip through. I put fleece on it and I go inside. And probably within 20 minutes to half an hour, either they're all gone or almost all of them are gone.
Wow.
They just go on their own because now they've been acclimated. They know the sounds and they just want to go. That's the perfect thing.
That's the perfect thing. Are you trying to release at dusk? Dawn?
Yes. I only release at dusk or dawn, and I usually release at dusk. And the reason why is because of people and their dogs and their cats. They let their cats out. They walk their dogs off leash, even though they're not supposed to. And, the rabbits don't know necessarily, and they're not fast enough. So why did I go through all this work to release them at dawn so a dog can pick them up and, swallow them or whatever? So I usually do it at dusk because all the dog walking and everything has been done for the day. And this way they have a much better chance. And there are also, I think, somewhat degree of less predators out, even though there are other ones that are out.
Right. Oh, exactly. Okay. So what kind of pro tips do you have?
I would say one thing that people don't realize is anytime I'm around the rabbits, I have a very soft voice. It's not my normal voice when I'm working with them. I would talk to them, but it's like a whisper, like, come on over here. Come on over here. We've got to get to the nipple. Very soft. And when I enter their space, because it's a room in my house, when I enter their space and I open the door, the first thing I do is say, it's just me. It's okay. In the same voice, because they don't see me because they have the cloth over that side, but I want them to know it's okay. And if they hear that voice, and I mean, I've had rabbits when I release other rabbits come out of the woods and watch me because they still recognize my voice, I'm sure.
Sure.
So I always use that. It's my rabbit voice or my wild animal voice. And
Sure.
that's the voice that I use for whenever I'm working with wildlife. And it's very soft. You almost don't hear it. But it's how I work with them because it's calming, it's soft.
It also,
no harshness.
Right. It lends some predictability.
Correct.
And consistency and predictability lower stress.
Correct. So that's a big tip because I know people, when you're working with raccoons or when I was working with raccoons and squirrels, they're hardy. Those guys are
and they're loud.
And they're loud,
they're
right?
Loud.
And they're hardy. And so it's different when you're working with them. Rabbits are a different element. It's kind of like some birds too. You've got to be very soft. It's not
right.
It's not. They're a different element.
Right.
So I try to do that with them.
Right. So, and your principles, of course, is the animal comes first.
Right.
Right.
Less is more.
And less is more. Which
and
is
mirror nature as much as possible.
Right. Right. I think that those should be embroidered and put on everybody.
Well, they can be for any species. You just have to know the behavior of that species. You know what I mean? Like it translates to every single species.
It does. It does. Anything else? I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation.
I don't know. I don't know. I love my rabbits. One of the things is I can tell you that they all have personalities. People ask me, well, do you paint them with nail polish or something when you have like 7 in a litter? And I don't. I either have another carrier nearby that I can put them in as I feed them. Right. So I know, because otherwise there are some litters where I would get confused. I go by their weights oftentimes because I know by weights if there's a disparaging weight, I can tell who's who. Sometimes they look exactly the same. Sometimes they don't. Personalities, I always have what I call the sentinel, the little guard up front that smacks at my hands anytime I go to grab any of his litter mates to feed them or her litter mates to feed them. So yeah, there's that. But I find them totally entertaining. I love watching them. I don't know. I just love them. I mean, I love all wildlife, but the rabbits crack me up. They can be very funny, very funny.
Yeah, people don't think about that at all, that they're individuals. Yeah. They're very individual.
They are. And and each litter has their own like hierarchy of kind of who's the big mama and the little ones cuddle with, Yeah.
Very interesting.
So it's very interesting if you watch the dynamics between them.
Well,
but I had one person that I think it was a litter of 7 rabbits, and they all sat on top of their hideaway at one point. All 7 of them were fitting on this big rectangular hideaway. And I took a photo and I showed, because the finders always ask me, and that's another thing. I know it's a pain because the finders ask you for updates and things like that. And, but I always provide them because that cycle of, first of all, them being willing to step in and help, or them being unwilling to work with you,
right,
can kind of turn them around as they see and you educate them. So I think it can be a viable means, and even for future donations or things for your organization. That's another thing, because a lot of people do it from home or for a facility that's, they're 501c3, and the people love to see what happened to their animals. And sometimes the animals pass, and I don't reach out to them, but if they reach out to me, I'm honest. But otherwise I will give them updates. So this couple, I sent them the photo of the 7 on top of the hideaway. They actually blew it up, framed it, and had it over their sofa in their house.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So yeah, when you can involve them that way, then they are again like ambassadors, because they're going to tell the story, right? And then more people know. So,
and it's not just about those 7 rabbits, right?
No.
It is not about those 7 rabbits. It is about how it's going to influence their actions in the future.
Correct.
And maybe the people around them. I mean, all the way to how they vote, if they vote for the environment, or they vote in their local area. So there's now a park instead of an apartment building.
Correct.
And don't get me wrong, humans need housing too. But, we're losing habitat is still the number one problem that all these animals face. So this is where it starts. This is where it starts. We've got an emotional connection from the finder to this animal.
Use it.
And so we want to use it, and we want to use it in a positive way. We want to use it to affect change in the future. Right. We don't want them to feel bad because they let their dog out and the dog grabbed the bunny, or the cat grabbed the bunny. We can't do anything about that. We can't.
You can only change it going forward.
We can only change it going forward. So that's why making them feel bad doesn't help.
No,
it just doesn't help.
It creates more bitterness or more
it does.
like, yeah.
And they're not going to want to bring anything to you in the future. And they're going to tell that story.
Yep.
Don't bring this to so-and-so.
She yelled at me. I was trying to help.
And all I was doing was helping.
And that's even not what you want.
Right. Yeah. You don't want that. It is counterproductive because our goal is not only to release these animals, and we are dealing with individuals, but it is to try to affect our population of humans so that we start paying a lot more attention, that we are caring more, that we are saving space on this planet for them. Yeah. For them.
And especially with the kids. I feel like with the kids, and with the kids, it's a real visual. You can tell them that the rabbit was released, but I think I've done, if I can, I will, this is another thing, I will release the animal back to its natural
where it came
place,
from.
Right? However, oftentimes with the rabbits, it's in the middle of like the post road, there's a little island of grass, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of times with rabbits, it's not conducive. But what I have done is I've invited the families to watch the release. And I limit the number, and I draw a line where the kids can't cross from the grass. So I set it up like it's almost like a classroom educational, but they're able to see the rabbits go. And then one at a time, they can come up and take a photo or something. But I control the setting because I tell them I worked really hard with these guys and I don't want you to scare them now. So we have to be, we're all predators. But that experience for those kids, that's lasting. That is lasting. It really is. And it's the full circle. They did something good and look at what happened at the end, So it's something very positive that no amount of words can do. It's the visual.
Exactly. Well, Deborah Galle, I got to say, this has been so fun. I've had so much fun, and I'm hoping that everybody has gotten some nuggets, probably more than some. I got a lot of nuggets, and we will certainly have a lot of resources posted with this too. So I just want to thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I loved it. I love when people can hear things, or even when we pose the question about the dogs, like maybe someone has insight, so I love that back and forth, that feedback.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
That was Deb Galle, a Connecticut-based wildlife rehabilitator who specializes in caring for North American cottontail rabbits. Now, if this episode seemed familiar to you, like, didn't we cover cottontail rabbits before? You're right. In season 1, episode 14, I had a great discussion with Laura Davich from Rebound about raising rabbits. I just think there are many ways to do things correctly for the animals in our care. And since cottontail rabbits are some of the most frequent patients for wildlife rehabilitators, giving options is a great way to help them. You will see a lot of overlap too between Deb and Laura. Now, those are some of the sweet spots to pay attention to, especially the why behind every how and every what. Next episode, I welcome back another familiar face and voice, Tim Jasinski. Back in season 1, episode 19, he was here to talk about timberdoodles. This season, he joins me to discuss all things fostering Canada geese. He talks about why Canada goose is his favorite bird, gives an overview of the species' natural history, and so much more. I hope you'll join us for episodes 5 and 6 for this deep dive into fostering Canada geese. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buhl. I'm the partnership coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit raptor.umn.edu. Our producer is Kurt Clockey. Special thanks to our guest Deborah Galle, Partners for Wildlife, and the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us again next time.